And in the interest of time, we've got a lot of information to cover today. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So welcome and thank you for joining us today. For those of you that are here live, we really appreciate your time. And for those of us watching this recording later on, we appreciate your dedication to joining us in a time that works for you. My name is Cassidy Dragonet, and I'm joined today by my colleague Ashley Blackham. We both work at the Utah System of Higher Education and the Office of the Commissioner, and the focus of our roles is helping students access financial aid through completing the FAFSA as well as state aid. Today we'll be focusing on that FAFSA role. And before we get jumping in, there's just a couple of housekeeping items we wanted to start with. First, we have a lot of information to cover, as I've mentioned already, and so we would really appreciate it if you have any questions as we're going through to please hold them until the end. Rather than trying to remember them, feel free to put them in the chat. Ashley or I will be monitoring the whole time and can answer those as we go and return to any at the end that we don't get to answering, but that'll just make sure we can get through a lot of material today. And the final thing, caveat I want to throw out there is that we're going to be focusing on a high school student scenario today. So you'll notice Ashley and I are making the assumption that this is a high school senior who's applying for the FAFSA and preparing to go to college. But I do want to note that the FAFSA is a resource for students that are also adult students. There isn't an age limit in those who are completing the FAFSA or able to access the information. So if you're working with folks in the community who are maybe not the traditional high school student, just know that this information is applicable to them as well. All right. Again, quickly before we jump into the meat of the presentation, I just want to start by highlighting a few of the other trainings that we have prepared for the FAFSA process. And so first, thanks for anyone who joined us last week. And if you haven't but want a refresher, we did a deep dive part 1 that helps walk through the steps of creating a studentaid.gov account, which is the first step that's required for any student or required contributor to complete the FAFSA. So if you want a refresher on that step, Ashley will throw into the chat the link to that recording of that presentation that we did last week, and we invite you to go back and review that or share with colleagues for those steps or students and parents if they have questions. Today we'll be talking about the actual form itself and walking through kind of the nitty-gritty of that. But if you're looking for some practice that draws on real-life situations of students that we see, we'll be doing some case study presentations in the upcoming weeks. So a little bit different than we've done it in the past. Rather than breakout rooms where you can work through a couple of different presentation or individual case studies, we'll be working together as a group to cover one case study presentation or case study in each of the presentations. So next week, case study number 1 is a beginner level. It covers some more of the basics of FAFSA. Case study number 2 will dive into more intermediate level topics. And then the final case study on September 30th will be more advanced topics. So we invite you to join us for those as well. And you can register at that same page where you registered here on our website. Okay, jumping into the presentation and getting into what we're here for today is the deep dive or our part 2 of this boot camp series. So just a quick overview of the agenda. We're going to start by reviewing federal financial aid basics. If you want a more in-depth refresher of this, I'd encourage you to check out our Paying for College toolkit materials online or go back and rewatch the beginning of the account creation presentation we did last week. Today we'll just be covering a shorter version of that because we have more information to cover on the FAFSA form, which brings me to number 2. We'll be going through the 26-27 FAFSA form to help you all learn and prepare to help students and parents complete their FAFSA. We'll discuss some possible conversations that may come up and some troubleshooting options along the way. And then we'll spend a few minutes at the end reviewing the FAFSA submission summary, which is the best indicator that students have completed their form, as that's what generates after they've submitted their FAFSA themselves and any required contributors. So just getting started, like I said, we're going to start with a quick review of financial aid basics to help you all understand why a high school senior should complete the FAFSA. It's one of the most common questions that we get asked, and so I imagine it's similar for you all. So starting at the most highest level, we keep using this acronym FAFSA, and that stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's a federal form that students apply for starting their senior year. They can start applying October 1st. I know that timeline has been delayed the last few years, but the form will absolutely be available by October 1st this year for the 26-27 FAFSA. So students do complete the FAFSA for the year that they'll be enrolling in college. So it's important to make sure any seniors that are enrolling starting fall of 2026 are completing the 26-27 FAFSA form. The 25-26 FAFSA form is currently available for any college students who maybe haven't completed it and are enrolling this current academic year. That's a common mistake students make, is starting or filling out the wrong form. So that's important to note that they're filling out the right one starting October 1st, and that students do have to complete the FAFSA every year that they're in college to remain eligible or to continue to apply for federal aid, as well as to meet any requirements for other scholarships they're receiving that require them to continue to complete the FAFSA. Students will go to studentaid.gov to be able to start and complete their form. So we see the FAFSA as a gateway to financial aid and scholarship opportunities, which dives into that question of why should I complete the FAFSA? Again, a really common question that we receive from families and students when they're trying to figure out how to pay for college. And the paying for college journey is a puzzle, right? And so students are pulling together often lots of different pieces to be able to make the cost of college affordable for them. And the FAFSA is a really important first step for many students in order to pull together some of those pieces. So we'll talk about today the federal aid that students can qualify for. The FAFSA is a direct application for federal aid. And so we'll cover each of those in the next slide. But the FAFSA can also be make state aid, institutional aid, and some private scholarships accessible to students. There's need-based aid in each of those categories where the information from FAFSA may impact their eligibility and allow them to qualify for that additional aid from other resources. But there is also non-need-based aid programs that require FAFSA completion, where the results, whether a student is eligible for aid, federal financial aid, or has a, regardless of their student aid index number, their financial need, they may qualify for other aid. And the FAFSA completion component is required as best practice to make sure students are tapping in to all those different pieces to be able to pay for college. So as promised, diving just quickly into the different types of federal loans that federal aid that students can qualify for. And I'll start with federal student loans. So there's two different types students can qualify for: subsidized or unsubsidized. Subsidized means that interest does not start accruing as long as the student is enrolled at least half time. Unsubsidized would mean that interest does start accruing immediately. And whether a student qualifies for a subsidized loan is based on financial need that's determined on the FAFSA. The next kind of factor of how much a student may be able to borrow is whether they're a dependent or independent student. And we'll dive into helping students determine which category they fit into. But for the purposes of this slide, a dependent student is required to report their parents' information on the FAFSA. Which in that final column in the dark blue, it shows there the maximum amounts that students can borrow per year based on their independent status, and noting that maximum amount for subsidized loans, that's a cap. An important note for student loans is a lot of students don't want them. They hear that and it maybe makes them very weary of the FAFSA. And anytime a student is offered a federal student loan, they can absolutely decline it. If they don't need that help, they've got other sources, they can decline all of their federal student loans. But for some students, access to these loans may be that little bit of extra help that they need to be able to cover their college costs. It can be an investment in their education for their future, knowing that they do have to repay that amount and making sure that they're borrowing wisely. We strongly encourage students to look at all other types of gift aid or working options, saving options that they can first, but student loans can be a really important final piece of the puzzle for students. And so we'd encourage them to consider the federal student loans as an option before maybe seeking private loans. Aside from that, the other common type of aid that students may be familiar with is the Pell Grant program. This is gift aid that students receive that they don't have to repay. The maximum amount currently is just under $7,400 per year. That amount is subject to change annually. And that's a common grant that students, again, are familiar with, and it's based on financial need is how that it's awarded to students. But the final category of work study, I think, is often not talked about or forgotten part of the FAFSA. And so students, when they're completing this form, can qualify for work study positions on campus. There's a certain subset of jobs on campus that are reserved for work study eligible students. And so these jobs are generally flexible. They're primarily on-campus jobs, which can be really useful for students who have an employer who understands that they're a student, particularly during some of those more stressful times or busy times of the semester, but can also make it easier to be able to get from their job to class when they're all close by on campus. The student will see the full amount that they're eligible to receive for work study on their financial aid offer letter, but they'll receive that money as a paycheck. So they'll work to earn that money throughout the semester. They don't get it in a lump sum, and they may be eligible for a larger amount than they receive if they work less hours. But I think that's a really useful tool for a lot of students who are thinking about different ways to pay for college and thinking that they'll likely have to have a job. Work study is a great option for many of those students. Okay. Ashley, can you just confirm you can't see the chat on your screen, can you? It just popped up in the middle of mine. Okay, sorry, I think I fixed it so I can see this slide next. Okay, so providing federal or FAFSA customer service. So you all are probably one of the primary resources for families in your school community, and they're stopping and coming to you to ask for help for paying for college, including the FAFSA. So when you're discussing the FAFSA with students, one of the more critical things that we think can be useful in these conversations is to maintain a positive outlook. The FAFSA form is a notoriously complicated form. In the last few years, we've all seen the news that it was a difficult form, that it was kind of plagued with bugs and was a really frustrating process for a lot of students to be able to complete and access aid. That being said, there's been a lot of improvements, and it is really an impactful tool for students to be able to access lots of different aid like we just talked about. So while we want to validate all of the experiences, maybe they know someone who's struggling with student loans, or they have a family member who ran into a lot of those struggles on the 24-25 FAFSA. And they're nervous about completing the form themselves, or maybe they themselves have run into some issues and they're feeling frustrated or exhausted. Those are completely valid experiences. I know we've probably all seen and helped students and families stuck in those situations. So while those are valid, as much as we can remain positive and help students remember that this can be an impactful tool for them, can be helpful in the long run for them in accessing this additional aid to help them make the cost of college a bit more manageable. Not everyone's going to be coming in with a strong level of FAFSA knowledge. Maybe they're starting with just reminding them how to complete a FAFSA form, or excuse me, how to start their FAFSA account. So making sure you're tailoring your approach to meet their level of understanding, and feel free to refer them or connect with our team or a financial aid office at an institution if the questions get to be maybe a bit out of depth or a little bit beyond your expertise as well. But just remember that most families and students do benefit from personalized one-on-one assistance. While we love the FAFSA nights that happen, the open house style ones, those are excellent. You get a lot of folks in the same room. You kind of build this culture of accessing financial aid to be able to pay for college. And we think that's really valuable. And the reason we work with our institutions to send those experts out is so that they can have those important one-on-one interactions. And we know that you all are on the front line of that outside of those one-time events or events that happen a few times a year. And so we really appreciate your support in making this a tool that's a little bit demystified for students when they come seeking help from you all. And from here, I'm going to kick it back off to Ashley.
Hello. Yes, we're sharing duties today. We have a lot of information to cover, so we appreciate you all being here and hearing from both of us today. So I'll kick us off here with the actual uh, kind of FAFSA application walkthrough. We'll start with kind of the introduction at the beginning of the FAFSA application, go through what consent looks like, and yeah, kind of go from there. So, just a little reminder here is that everything that we're looking at today, screenshots that we've taken are going to be from the 2026-27 prototype, which is produced directly from FAFSA, from Federal Student Aid. Just being mindful that some things could be subject to change when the actual form is live in October. We've also used a few screenshots from presentations from FAFSA, and so just again keep that in mind that anything that you're seeing here, if you're referring back to this presentation at a later time, things may look a teeny bit different once they actually go live. But this is a good look at what the Start New Form, you know, basic welcome screen will look like. Students can, up in the top right hand corner, toggle between an English and a Spanish version of the form. So we'll get started. We'll move to the next one here. Just a little bit of background information for FAFSA, that there are 3 parts. Again, we did go over the studentaid.gov account creation in our previous video. We'll make sure that there's, oh no, we did. Not will make sure. I think I made sure the link that I put in the chat earlier was to the YouTube video of that. So you can always refer back. Again, that's available year round. We used to, I think, push that year-round account creation a little bit more, and we mentioned that in the previous video when there was at least a 1 to 3 day turnaround with verification there, and that has been simplified this year. So that will lead us into the actual FAFSA form. We'll go through that. Again, as Cassidy mentioned, it is available for high school seniors and then for all college students. And it's available in the fall prior to when they will actually be attending that semester in school. And then third part would be a FAFSA submission summary and any subsequent corrections. I know as FAFSA support folks, a lot of times we're asked questions after the fact. And so we want to be able to give you a little bit of a look at what the submission summary looks like. That way, if students have questions once they've submitted and a need to make changes, we'll go through that a little bit. So covering FAFSA form and then FAFSA submission summary today. Alrighty, so for FAFSA tracks, we just want to point out there are a few different ways that the FAFSA form can be essentially started and then submitted. For students who are dependent, which means they need a contributing parent to provide information. This is essentially the kind of situation we'll be walking through today. And we are going to encourage and hope that you all will be able to encourage students to follow this track. This year, as we mentioned in our previous video, there is a simplified contributor process this year for sending an invitation and having the parents kind of get invited and accepted there. And the way that it's been incorporated is through this first track. If the student starts the FAFSA, essentially invites their parent, and then they all submit the FAFSA at the end. The other options, that the parent starting the FAFSA is still an option, but this simplified invitation process is not applicable there. So the FAFSA does ask some additional questions and things that way. So it's a possibility, and we can definitely help answer some questions if that's the route folks have decided to go that you're helping. But for the purpose of today, we'll focus on that first column, and then we will talk a little bit about if an independent student is starting the FAFSA. That means they don't have contributing parent information, and then they'll submit. Because there are lots of different scenarios and ways that things can play out, we did provide a link here down at the bottom. This is to that federal student aid presentation that I mentioned earlier that some of the screenshots are borrowed from. Their presentation is maybe about over 200 slides or so. We don't have quite that many for you today, but they go through a lot of other scenarios. So there is a link for you there. That way, if there's anything that we don't cover today, you can go through that. And then hopefully we'll talk about some other situations, as Cassidy mentioned in those other deep dive case study links that we have for the next few weeks as we finish out the month of September. So here we go. So beginning the FAFSA, logging in. So again, we're going through this situation today as if we're a student. So the student, if they are not logged in, they will be directed to this page essentially. So if they don't have their studentaid.gov account created, the ID verification again is instant this year. So folks should be able to create an account the same day they want to submit their information. So if the student gets to this login page and they don't have their account, they can click on that little option down there. Otherwise, they'll go ahead and just log in there. We do want to go over the roles. This screen is pretty important as you're moving forward. I think a lot of questions or errors we see in the past as we're volunteering or out at FAFSA events is whether or not you're filling out the form and entering correct information for the right person. So again, in this situation, Alex is our student, so we'll want to make sure that the FAFSA form is being started by selecting student. The questions move on from there, asking student-related questions. No parent questions would be asked here. If it's saying Alex at the top of the page and the questions inside are asking about a parent, go to the previous screen and come back out, make sure we're, starting that as a student. And again, we'll kind of continue from here. After this screen, when the student begins, they do include some informational videos directly from FSA. And so we definitely encourage students to watch those before clicking through to the actual form. Again, we provide some of that information today, but we don't want to keep you here for hours and hours. So there may be additional information there that students will find helpful. So after they continue here, they can watch those as well, just to make sure that they've got all their questions answered. All right. So we'll go through the FAFSA sections really quickly. Again, we'll start now going forward as the student. They've got a little bit more information that we need to cover. They have the 6 sections. They do have on step 5 the process to invite their contributor. So again, this is if it's a dependent student. The parent underneath has a few sections less. There is this one here, number 3, the contributor invite. That will only appear in certain circumstances where it's necessary. So we talked about a few circumstances in the previous presentation, but for instance, if the parent is married and filed taxes separately, they would see this third section here for a contributor invite. If the parents are married filing jointly, then the parent section will just include 3 sections: demographics, financials, and signature. So we'll go over those in a little bit more detail for parents as we continue the scenario, but for now we'll look directly at the student information. First screen they will see is their student identity information. They'll confirm the basic information at the top. So name, date of birth, social security number, email, phone number. If any of those are incorrect, the updates need to be made in account settings. Those are all kind of imported into the start of their FAFSA form from the information that they entered when they created their studentaid.gov account. So those errors would need to be updated in account settings, and then they'll review the permanent mailing address and can update it there in the form if necessary. Next, the students will be asked about their state of residence. They will confirm. They're given a little drop down for the state, and then if born in that state, students enter in their birth month and birth year, and then click continue. And then after that, they will be asked to provide consent. So this page essentially informs the student about it, about approval and the use of the federal tax information. Once the student provides consent and approval, their federal tax information will be transferred directly from the IRS into the FAFSA form. The student over in this little section can open up those little drop downs if they have any questions about that, and then they'll select approve to be taken to the next page. And then just a little bit more information about consent. It is required for all contributors, no matter their personal situation, in order to be eligible for all types of aid. So that's if the contributor is a tax filer, a non-tax filer, or a foreign tax filer. And then just a reminder that contributors are always the student, maybe a student's spouse if applicable. If it's a dependent student, then their parent, either biological or adoptive, and then kind of as we mentioned before, there may be an other parent depending on the situation. If the students on that previous page were to click decline, it would nullify the entire FAFSA, and then if the student's parent is clicking decline, it would nullify all aid except unsubsidized student loans. Oops, I went back. Terribly sorry. So this page essentially is what you'll see when it's importing the student's federal tax information, directly kind of doing that data transfer section. Students, once they've selected to provide consent and approve, this is done automatically. And then, oops, I'm so sorry. My screen must be slow, or I am user error, but I keep going backwards. I apologize. This is, let's see, the screen they'll see once it's securely importing their information over from the IRS. The next slide, there we go, would be for students as a result of the import. So this scenario is for a student who would be starting a new FAFSA form and there was no federal tax information available from the IRS. If they click continue, they would be asked to provide additional information about their tax filing, and we'll show some other slides about that in just a second. Um, I'm so sorry. My screens are just a little bit slow to roll. Okay, so first we'll go through personal circumstances. As I mentioned before, the students who are filling this out have these 6 sections. So essentially, we're going to go through them quickly to understand, again, the difference between an independent and dependent student, and kind of what the differences of their forms will look like, and try to answer any questions that maybe pop up in this situation for students who are answering those questions about dependent and independent students. There's some links to information with federal student aid where we can get you some definitions and help there as well. So for this first section, dependent student personal circumstances, essentially it's just reminding students that they'll be asked questions here to determine eligibility for aid. And just as a reminder that sometimes they'll need to collect information from other people depending on their answers. And again, they'll let you know if that's the case. So it is kind of an intuitive form that will look a little bit different to each student depending on how they're answering the question. So we'll go over like general questions that should be asked in this section in the next few slides, but there could be a few additional questions on the actual form that we may not cover in the following slides. Just know that, again, they'll be asking about general personal circumstances and can vary for each student. So, all right. The first question on the FAFSA is not actually listed. It's related to the student's date of birth. So essentially, if the student is 24 or older, they're going to be considered an independent student. So we'll kind of go over a few slides to help determine that. But again, dependent students will need to report information about their parents on their FAFSA form. Independent students will only report information about themselves and not their parents. So the little graphic at the bottom kind of just gives us a little bit of an idea of kind of who qualifies here. For dependent, if you are a student with 1 or 2 parents, they're independent student, either 24 and older, or a student who is married, or a student who is providing support to a child, or like other situations. So we'll kind of cover a few of those. And then, as I mentioned in the previous slides, we'll connect you with more information with federal student aid so we can look into some of the more challenging situations a little bit deeper at a different time. We'd keep you here for a long time if we tried to do too many things today. So we again appreciate your willingness to learn, even though there are going to be, I'm sure, lots of other situations that we're not able to cover. We'll keep going here. So the first question the student will be asked is about their marital status. For the purpose of this presentation, again, we're going to have the student as single, never married. Again, in this in other situations, if a student were to select married, they may be considered an independent student. Alrighty, so good spot here to double check information is student is asked their college grade level for the 26-27 school year, and then whether they'll have their first bachelor's degree. So as Cassidy mentioned earlier, this is the 26-27 FAFSA. We're going through this presentation as a high school student that's planning for their future. So they plan to graduate in 2026, attend college starting fall of 2026 and spring of 2027. However, there is another FAFSA that is available on the website currently. So this is a good spot that you can help students catch themselves, making sure that it is matching up with their current plans. So 26, 27, what will their college grade level be? So if they are going to be a first year freshman, they'll click that. And then when the student begins the 26-27 school year, will they already have their first bachelor's degree? They'll be clicking no. Personal circumstances. So this section, students are asked if any of the following personal circumstances apply. If students are answering yes to any of these questions, they may be considered an independent student. So moving forward, we're going to mark that none of these situations apply, but you'll want to make sure students are reading carefully through all of these situations. And then the form is helpful over there to the right. There are info icons. So if students need some additional information, for instance, it says at any time, since the student turned 13, were they an orphan, no living biological or adoptive parent? If it's a murky area, perhaps clicking there to get some clarification before deciding whether to check that box, that's helpful. If you need additional clarification, feel free to reach out. Again, moving forward, we'll say none of these apply. Students next are asked if they have been homeless or are at risk of becoming homeless. The student in our situation is going to select no. If students you're working with are selecting yes, they would be considered an independent student. And then students who should be prepared to provide additional documentation to their financial aid office at their college to verify that status. Next, we'll cover unusual circumstances. The student is essentially asked if any of these circumstances prevent the student from being able to contact their parent. So they'll read through those situations. Again, for our presentation, we're going to mark no, but if a student does mark yes to any of these unusual circumstances, they should prepare to have their college follow up about those unusual circumstances. Their FAFSA can be signed and still submitted as they're working through that, but students will receive a provisional student aid index or SAI. And essentially, provisional just means it's given to them for now until their circumstances are verified. And that is done at the college level. So we would just encourage students to follow up with the financial aid offices at their college to confirm what additional documentation would need to be provided to cover any of their unusual circumstances. If a student were to answer yes to any of the unusual circumstances or that previous screen where they were experiencing homelessness, they would be considered provisionally independent and again would not need to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Just to make it a little more clear, as mentioned before, the student can sign and submit their FAFSA as part of their process same day, but should plan to follow up with their financial aid office. And until the verification is complete, the student receives their estimate of their federal aid eligibility here. And then the school will review and determine whether a dependency override is warranted, and then they'll move forward with their college there. Based on the answers that students provided by in the previous section about their dependent status. Again, we're going through here. So those answers, marking no, is a dependent student. So here's where you'll be able to tell if the dependency status is independent. It would look a teeny bit different for those students. But for our demonstration, we're moving forward, dependent student. For this section underneath, the students will want to make sure no is marked. I do believe it does auto mark to no, but just make sure the student wants to be considered for Pell Grant and other types of aid. If they mark yes, that they want to be considered for an unsubsidized loan only, they'll get a little warning message and letting them know that they're going to miss out on those other potential types of federal aid. So just making sure that students who are wanting to be considered for all of the options that we went over, the loans, Pell Grants, and federal work study, just making sure no here is selected. Perfect. Next section is demographics. So here we'll just want to understand who is eligible to complete the FAFSA. Student demographics is basically going to ask students about their particular background and any information about their family, so that you can just click continue through those. They should be the same for the students in this section. So dependent student demographic information here. Students are asked to identify their sex and asked to identify their race. It does give them, like once you check a certain box, the drop down opens up and allows them to check some additional information for any that apply. And all applicants are required to answer these questions before proceeding. And students should just be aware that this information doesn't affect their eligibility for federal aid, and it's not used in any of the aid calculations, nor is it shared with any of the colleges the student selects on the application. But these questions are required. Next, excuse me, the student is asked about their citizenship status. Only U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens can qualify for federal aid. We've linked here the eligibility requirements for eligible non-citizens that Federal Student Aid or FSA has on their website. So if there is a situation where students are unsure if they're an eligible non-citizen, that link is super helpful for some clarification before students continue. Again, for this presentation, we're marking that the student is a U.S. citizen or national before we click continue. Next, the student will be asked their high school completion status at the start of the 26-27 school year. So this is the start of their college school year, the fall of 26, spring of 27 school year. So the student at this point would have their high school diploma and should select that information going forward before hitting continue. Awesome. And then because they select high school diploma, they will need to select the high school that they have graduated from or will graduate from. So students may be filling out this form or likely are filling out this form while they are still in high school. So it will be what high school they will graduate from. The information here is super important that students enter the correct high school. The answer in this section is the piece of information that is used to track how the FAFSA completions for each high school are doing each year. And that's the data that's shared from FSA. So just when students are picking from this drop down, being mindful of selecting the right state and searching and selecting the right high school here before clicking continue. All right. Next section is student financials. So we'll just want to make sure that students feel comfortable entering the information here that is required. We talked briefly about the tax filing status being verified earlier when they're giving consent to pull information directly from I'm so sorry. When the direct data exchange is being verified at the beginning of the application. So this particular slide here is just showing if the student is beginning their filing status as single, they're asked about a 2024 tax return. Generally, students in our situations that we're talking about that are in high school are likely to not have a 2024 tax return unless they're working a lot. So the situations may vary, but they are able to click no and continue in this situation if the student has not filed a tax return. Even though we are talking about the direct data exchange and information that is shared, students are going to be asked a few questions about their taxes, income, and assets that are separate from any data that transfers. So in these few questions here, the student will just follow through them and answer those as they apply. If there is nothing to report, they enter 0. Next is student colleges. So here we just want to take a look at how to add college, career schools, and trade schools to the FAFSA. Here, the students use the tool to select their college information. It starts with state and then essentially gives them like a little pop-up to select the state, and then it gives them another menu where they can search. If the students cannot find the school by searching the state, they can use the federal school code. Students can see their choices here on this page. This one is showing up to 4, but students can select up to 20 schools to add on their FAFSA, and they do have one more opportunity to update this at the end of their application before submitting it, and then they can always process corrections later if they're at 20 schools and need to remove a few and add a few more. They can process a correction later on as well. All right, part 5. Quickly, we will just go through understanding how to invite a parent contributor to the FAFSA form. As we mentioned, this process is a little bit different this year than it's been in the past. So we'll provide a couple of screenshots on the next slide here. So the student is asked to enter their parent's email address to invite them to their FAFSA form. They'll do this by entering their email address. In the past, they were asked for a lot more information that needed to match exactly in order to be able to kind of send the invite and connect those. And so this is where we kind of mentioned there's a much easier process now if the student is the one sending the invite. All they need to do is enter in their parent's email address here. It gives them one more reminder. So this first screen here says send invite, and then the grayed out version, it sends a pop-up. So just double check that the email is correct, and then the student will send the invite to their contributor. In addition to sending the email to their parent contributor, it also provides some additional information on how you can link the two applications. And this is meant to simplify the process, and I think will be really helpful. So here it confirms the email address that the invitation was sent to, but the student can also copy a unique link. And then in addition, the very bottom one is just the actual code. So you can just copy and paste the code. And in a few minutes, we'll go through the parent portion, and we'll kind of show you where that can just be either copied and pasted in. You can, like I said, use the copy and paste full link. It does include that specific code there at the end, or with the invitation that's been sent, it will also include that information in the parent email that is sent. So there's a few ways to be able to send and link the information this year, and that should be a little bit easier than it has been in the past to be able to share and quickly be able to link the information. I think in the past FAFSA nights that we had attended, a lot of times it was waiting around saying, hey, I'm still not getting this email, it's not coming through. Saying wait 1 to 3 business days to get the link or the invite, where now if the parent and the student are sitting together at your FAFSA night table, they can just look at this code and type it right in at their computer, at their application when they're ready. So hopefully, yeah, this process is a lot easier than it was in the past. We're looking forward to this. So all right, final section will be signatures. So for this section, we just want to look at how to review the FAFSA answers. There is, like I mentioned, a process to submit corrections, but if that can be avoided, there is options to be able to review. Oh, I guess I need to move to the next one so you can see that. I'm so sorry. So students can review the page here. There's little arrows in those main sections that we just went through. So those 6 sections, they can toggle through the arrows, review any information, and make any adjustments by clicking the edit information. And then after they click continue, oh, sorry, one more thing. At the bottom, there is a contributor section, so they can review again the information. If perhaps the contributor is not sitting next to them at the FAFSA night, they're sending their information and wanting to, check in with that person the next day, perhaps they can double check again here and make sure that contributor information is correct. And then once they click continue, they see this sign FAFSA page. So they'll just want to make sure the box is checked and sign. And then they will see this section for student section pending submission. So that's also important, that while the student section has been submitted, their full submission is pending because, as you'll notice on the banner underneath, it says check with your contributor. So that means there is still information that needs to be submitted. Up at the top, there is the one blue check mark for student section, but you'll notice for number 2, it does say there's a parent section that's still required. So students can like review information here, keep this for their records, and then make any updates or like things they need to down at the bottom for their contributor information, for the code, and make adjustments there if necessary. But yeah, we'll move next into what the parents will do once the student has submitted their section. So
Great, thanks, Ash. Okay, like Ashley said, next I'm going to cover the parent portion for a dependent student. So you all can see, first we're going to start with what it looks like to accept the invitation that the student has just sent. So these screenshots show the FAFSA invite. This is not in the student's, or excuse me, in the parent's FAFSA account or in any sort of FAFSA form, or in the student.gov account rather. This is an actual copy of the email that the parent receives. So like Ashley mentioned, there's a couple of those other options where they can log into a parent account and just put in the invite code or follow that invite code link directly. But in this case, and kind of how I imagine many parents will do it, they'll receive this email invite. You'll see it shows the student's first name and last initials, so they get a good sense that this is their student they want to be sharing information on the FAFSA for. It gives them that link to accept the invite. On the second screenshot is just a continuation where it gives that unique invite code that matches what's in the student's account. If the invite was actually sent to the wrong person by mistake, it gives them the option to decline to provide their information, and it gives just some brief information about why they were invited to complete the form. So in this case, the parent, we're going to have click accept invitation, that link. It will redirect them to the login page for their studentaid.gov account. Here, if the parent has an account, they'll log in. If they don't, they'll also be able to create an account. Ideally, the parent would have created their account before the invite gets sent, but like Ashley mentioned, with the instant ID verification and process this year, they should be able to create an account and then automatically retrieve their FAFSA data without any delay as there had been in the past. So they'll log into their account and they should be directed, because they've followed that accept invitation link, straight to the accept the 26-27 FAFSA invitation. When they follow that link, the invite code should also automatically populate there into the box. You'll note at the bottom there, they can also double check and make sure that their student has invited them to complete the correct FAFSA. It gives them instructions to navigate to their My Activity if they want to fill out an existing invitation for a different FAFSA form. Or if for some reason they don't have an invite code, it kind of gives them some more information where they can enter directly from that student's account here. But again, in this case, we're going to assume they've clicked that accept invite, the code auto-populates, and they click submit. The second screenshot shows the little pop-up that will appear, just making sure that the parent is accepting that they're going to be sharing some of their personal information to fill out the FAFSA form to help their student complete their FAFSA. So once they get in, you'll notice a lot of parallels to the student form. The parent first confirms their personal identity information. So the information at the top, the name, birthday, social security number, email, and phone number are all already information that they've included to create their account. So if any of that needs to be updated, there's actually a little link over here that's blocked by this other screenshot, but it'll give them a link directly to go back to their account settings to update any of that if it's needed. I'll note that the email address that's associated with the account does not need to match the email address the student used to invite them. It's probably helpful to get it all in the same place, but it doesn't have to match if for some reason they're two different ones. And then finally, the parent will confirm their permanent mailing address, and if they need to update that information, they can do so on this page, and then they'll click continue. They'll see the same consent and approval information that the student saw. Again, this page informs the parent about their consent approval for their use of their federal tax information for the FAFSA to automatically retrieve it. The same frequently asked question boxes appear that the parent can review if they want more information, and then they'll be given the option to accept or decline. Again, if the parent declines, the student is only going to be eligible for a limited federal financial aid, only those unsubsidized federal student loans where the interest begins to accrue immediately. So if they click decline, another warning box should pop up to make sure that they're sure they want to select that. But in most cases, the parent will click approve. They'll move to the next page where, again, it shows this loading page where it's transferring the information. A question in the chat earlier was how long does this take? Generally like 30 to 60 seconds. It's actually really quick where it's retrieving that information and securely storing it and attaching it to the form. So once they've completed those initial steps, again, similar to the student, they'll see that progress bar that will appear. The parents only have 3 sections to complete, and so we'll talk through each of these sections so you'll understand what the parent of a dependent student is required to enter on the application before they're able to sign and submit. So first, the parent will be asked about their current marital status. For the purposes of this case, we're going to have the parent select that they're married and not separated, but you can see there's a variety of options here. This helps in the FAFSA in figuring out who needs to be a contributor. Next, the parent confirms their state of residency. Again, same as the student, where if the parent is residing in the state where if the current state where they're residing is where they were born, they enter their birth date and month and year into those boxes. Next, they move into the finance section. On this first page, it gives them a quick overview, but there's also a link that gives more information if they have special financial circumstances that they can review if they want to learn more. After clicking continue, the next page, they'll enter information about the receipt of federal benefits. So they'll select the boxes that apply. Again, most of these pages have the little question info icon that Ashley mentioned earlier. I think they're a really underutilized resource on the page. A lot of folks, I think, skip over them, but they actually include some really helpful information if parents are unsure or a student as they're completing their portion are unsure if it applies or need a little bit more information to make sure they're answering the question accurately. So those appear for all of the federal benefits. And then the parent will also need to confirm their tax filing status. So this is important. Again, the 26-27 FAFSA, because we use prior year taxes, is looking back at 2024 tax information. So the parent will confirm their tax filing status if they as well as if they filed jointly, if they selected that they were married. In this case, if they filed taxes jointly in 2024 with their current spouse, the additional spouse doesn't need to have their own account to submit additional information. If they were married but filed separately, the other spouse will need to have their own account and submit information, and there'll be a spot where they can invite that additional contributor here. But in this case, we're assuming that the parents are married and filed their taxes jointly. Related to those last questions, something that we sometimes get asked is, do I need to file my taxes in order to qualify for aid from the FAFSA? And the answer depends on the individual situation. So this information and screenshot is from the IRS publication regarding tax filing status. And so the families will want to review this information, but if based on their filing status, their age, and their gross income, if their income is higher than the threshold that's set here in this in the box that's applicable to them, then the answer is yes. If the answer is no, if their income was lower than the threshold set in their applicable box, the answer is no, and they can complete the form, the IRS and FAFSA information that the FAFSA retrieves from the IRS will indicate that as well. Next, the parents will move on to a page where they're able to determine the family size for the FAFSA here. So information will automatically populate on the parent's family size based on information from the 2024 taxes, but the parent's able to update that if they need for the number of dependents, if maybe they have a new family member that's joined them, a new dependent, or maybe someone who's aged out and is no longer considered a dependent as described here. So they'll enter that number. on the first page, click continue, and then they'll be able to answer the question about how many family members will be in college for between July 1st, 2026 and June 30th, 2027. And that's specifically asking about dependents, I should note, for the number of family members in college. Next, they'll move on to their tax return information. Like we said, most of the information is automatically retrieved from the IRS, but there are some additional information about the 2024 tax return that gets asked here. So the filing status is again asked here. If they married and filed jointly or any of the other statuses, they'll enter that here. If the parent responds to each of the questions as they're reviewing it, if they don't have anything to report, they can enter 0. Next, for the parent assets, they will be entering information about their child support received, any of their investments, including real estate, but not the home that the parent lives in full-time, as well as some other information about businesses and small farms. For this one, if you have a family that's asking some more specific information, again, I'd encourage them to use these little info icons. They have a really great depth of knowledge for the being a little bit of extra information on the form that can really help answer a lot of the common questions that come up of should this be included and how do I add this information here? And then I think this is getting to the final part of the parent information as far as what needs answering new questions. And they're asked about their spouse, where in this situation, they selected that they're married and that they filed jointly, that they're not separated. It just asks for some really basic information about the FAFSA, or excuse me, about the other spouse that gets entered. And the rest of it, because the parents are married and filed their taxes jointly, the other spouse does not need to be a contributor and have their own account. So that brings us basically to the end of this parent section. All that's left is to review and sign the form. So parents here, just like the student section, have an opportunity to review all of the information that they've entered. They'll expand to review, and there'll be a hyperlink that can bring them back directly to the correct section of the form if there is something that needs to be updated. Once they click continue, those same terms and conditions will appear as it did for the student, where they'll review those. And once they're ready, they'll check the box at the bottom to agree to the terms and click continue or submit. For this case, because the student had already completed their part first, the parent is completing the other part, and that's the last step in the FAFSA. That means the student's form is fully submitted. So the student, because it's their application, will be the one that gets an update to let them know that they're with more details and a full confirmation in the student's account. They'll also be able to log in and see track the status of their form, see that everything has been completed. And once the FAFSA has been processed, the FAFSA summary will appear there. The student in their own account will also be able to see if the contributor has not completed their part. It'll look a little bit different. So in this case, the parent signed and submitted, and the student is ready to go. So we'll next talk about, I'll turn it over to Ashley to wrap us up with the FAFSA summary.
Awesome. Thank you for hanging in there. We're getting close here. So we'll just go over the FAFSA submission summary quickly. Again, we just want you to be able to be familiar with the submission summary in case you need to help students follow up who have completed their FAFSA, but maybe have additional questions and need other help. So let's see. There we go. Okay. FAFSA submission summary. So essentially this is a landing page for the students who have processed their FAFSA form, and then they can do any subsequent corrections that they've submitted also will show up here. So as you can see over on the right, it says viewing submission 1. So essentially that would be the first submission of when they submitted their FAFSA, and then if they have submitted any corrections after that, they may see other versions of their FAFSA here on their FAFSA submission summary. And then essentially the FAFSA submission summary is divided into 4 tabs. So it starts with eligibility overview, their FAFSA form answers, school information, and then next steps. So quickly, we'll just look at those 4 different tabs. So the first one is the eligibility overview. You can kind of see up right there where you can kind of toggle through the different tabs. But the eligibility overview tab just shows students information about the federal student aid that they may be eligible for, such as the Pell Grant and any federal loans. Any amounts of financial aid that display on this tab, though, are estimates and are not guaranteed. The final decision or determination is made by the school's financial aid office. It's included in the student's award package at the school so they can follow up final eligibility with their college. Just as an additional overview here, students can also view on this tab their student aid index. We spoke about this a few other times in the presentation, but the student aid index essentially is like the number that is used to calculate what type and maybe how much of a particular type of aid students are eligible for, so they can review that information in their eligibility overview tab as well. For FAFSA form answers, this is the next tab here. This shows any of their students' answers as well as their contributors, if applicable, that are provided in the form. You can view those. If any information here is incorrect, the student can select that blue button that says make a correction. So we're hopeful that students are catching all of these prior to submission, but if they are looking through their information here and anything is incorrect, they can definitely make a correction. FAFSA form answers for contributors. Again, this is just a continuation of that answers tab. If applicable, again, the student can see the answers that their contributors have provided on their FAFSA form, and again, can move forward with any corrections. The school information tab is here, the third one. This one essentially just shows the students information about the colleges that they selected to receive their FAFSA information. It divides the information out a little bit more so students can kind of review things that might be helpful to their maybe decisions as far as where they're going to attend. They can see graduation, retention rate, transfer, default rate, medium debt upon completion, other things here. So that might be helpful to students who are still maybe making determinations over, where and what types of decisions will work best for them. Next steps and additional resources here. That's just the final tab. This one, the students can see comments related to their FAFSA form. Some comments may require the students to make corrections or send additional documentation to their school. If students are selected for verification, more information would show up here. Other comments here might be other comments here might just be informational and they might not require any action, but may be helpful for students to be navigating to this tab and just making sure that there is not any additional action that needs to be taken. And then on the right-hand side of the FAFSA submission summary page, the student can access additional resources, including links to My Aid or their college scorecard. Alrighty, we made it. We're back. These are just a few of our resources here. I think we've provided a few of them in the chat as well, but just a reminder here as well. I did include a link for the FAFSA help resources as well. I'll provide our support information on the next page, and we are always happy to help with any questions, any troubleshooting information, but just to keep in mind that we are a state partner of this federal form, so while we do the best to help, if there is something that's actually related to the form or like your studentaid.gov account, you may need to reach out directly to FAFSA. So there is just a link here to their FAFSA help and support as well. And then I'll move over and give you our information. So here again is our email, phone number. I think we clarified in our last meeting that this contact is a resource for you all, but also for students and parents that you're working with. You're more than welcome to, provide them with our phone number and email address if they have additional questions that need to be answered. I feel like we get a lot of phone calls or emails with families and counselors or other FAFSA help folks too. So we're happy to be looped in with everyone if there's questions or anything like that. Cassidy, any last thoughts before we open? I noticed that there were lots of good comments and things coming in the chat, so we really appreciate that. But we can be available for some additional time here for follow-up questions at the end if there's anything. So
Yeah, thanks again for everyone. Thank you, Ashley, for providing the bulk of this information, but everyone here for being really engaging in the chat, asking great questions, and just spending your time with us this morning. The one other thing I'll add in there, and then I will mute myself and let you all ask any questions you have, is a link to the FAFSA event, UCA and FAFSA events that are scheduled for this upcoming year. If your school isn't on there and you want to be, there's an event change request that you can submit a request for a new one. Like I mentioned in the chat, if anyone was seeing that, our availability is getting more and more limited, especially in October and early November. So if you haven't scheduled an event, we may have to work with you to find a date, but we're happy to do that. Or if maybe you aren't ready to host an event yourself, I'd encourage you to look for some other local partners at a school nearby that maybe you can help support or coordinate to maybe have some of your students work with jointly. We've found a lot of success in that partnerships that have formed as well. So with that, like I said, as promised, we can mute ourselves. You're welcome to stick around for questions. Ashley and I have some time. Or if you have other things to get on with for your day, thanks for joining us, and we'll share out the slides and recordings shortly. All right. Any questions? We threw a lot of information at you all. So if the answer is no, not right now, you have our contact information and you're welcome to follow up.
you're welcome to hop out. We maybe will just stay here for just a couple minutes. That way, if anyone's shy or feeling like they don't want to answer in front of the full group, and we can